My name is Sarah, and at 47, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. After my divorce 3 years ago, I'd moved to this remote cabin in Montana, seeking solitude and peace. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and that's exactly how I liked it. My days were filled with painting landscapes, tending my small garden, and enjoying the silence that only true wilderness can provide. It was a particularly harsh October morning when I first saw him. I was sipping my coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise from the valley below, when movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just another deer wandering through my property, but as the figure emerged from the tree line, my breath caught in my throat. A bobcat, magnificent and wild, with tufted ears and spotted coat gleaming in the early sunlight. But something was wrong. He moved with a slight limp, favoring his left front paw, and his ribs were visible beneath his fur. This wasn't the confident predator I'd read about in nature books. This was a creature in distress. Our eyes met across the clearing, and for a moment, time stood still. He didn't run, which surprised me. Instead, he sat down about 30 feet away, watching me with those piercing amber eyes. There was something almost human in his gaze, a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. I knew feeding wild animals was discouraged, even dangerous. But looking at this beautiful creature, clearly struggling to survive, I felt my heart break a little. Sometimes compassion overrides common sense. Against every piece of wildlife advice I'd ever heard, I slowly stood up and walked into my cabin. The bobcat remained motionless, watching my every move through the window. In my refrigerator, I found some leftover chicken from last night's dinner. My hands trembled slightly as I cut it into smaller pieces. When I returned to the porch, he was still there, though he'd moved a few feet closer. I could see the hunger in his eyes now, the way his nostrils flared at the scent of the meat. Carefully, I placed the chicken pieces on a plate and set it down on the porch steps, then retreated to my chair. For several minutes, we engaged in a silent standoff. He wanted the food desperately, but his wild instincts warred with his hunger. Finally, need won over caution. He approached with fluid, careful movements, never taking his eyes off me. When he reached the plate, he grabbed a piece of chicken and retreated several steps before devouring it. The process repeated until all the meat was gone. Throughout the entire meal, he kept glancing up at me, as if trying to understand why I was helping him. When the plate was empty, he sat back on his haunches and looked directly at me for a long moment. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the forest as silently as he'd arrived. I sat there for another hour, wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. But the empty plate on my porch steps proved it had been real. I'd just fed a wild bobcat, and somehow I knew this wasn't going to be a one-time occurrence. 3 days passed without any sign of my unexpected visitor. I began to wonder if he'd moved on to better hunting grounds or if my interference had somehow scared him away permanently. But on the 4th morning, as I stepped outside with my coffee, there he was again. This time he was sitting closer to the cabin, maybe 20 feet from the porch. His limp seemed less pronounced, and his coat had a healthier sheen. The food had clearly helped, but he was still too thin. When he saw me, he didn't flee. Instead, he made a soft chirping sound that I'd never heard a bobcat make before. I went through the same ritual, fetching chicken from the refrigerator, placing it on the plate, setting it on the steps, but this time he approached more quickly, with less hesitation. As he ate, I found myself talking to him in soft, soothing tones. "There you go, beautiful. Take your time. No one's going to hurt you here." His ears twitched at the sound of my voice, but he continued eating, When he finished, he didn't immediately retreat. Instead, he sat down and began grooming himself, as if my porch was a perfectly acceptable place for his morning routine. Over the following weeks, this became our pattern. He would appear at dawn, I would feed him, and he would linger a little longer each time. I started calling him Shadow, though I never said the name aloud. Somehow, naming him felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross. But with each passing day, that line became increasingly blurred. This wasn't just about feeding a hungry animal anymore. A bond was forming between us, fragile but undeniable. By November, Shadow's visits had become the highlight of my days. He was gaining weight, his coat was thick and lustrous, and his limp had completely disappeared. But more importantly, he seemed to trust me. He would eat while I sat just 10 feet away, and sometimes he would even lie down in my yard afterward, basking in the morning sun. I found myself looking forward to our dawn meetings with an anticipation that surprised me. Living alone for so long, I'd forgotten how much I missed having a connection with another living being. Even if that being was a wild predator who could kill me with one swipe of his powerful paws. One particularly cold morning, I decided to try something different. Instead of placing the food on the steps, I held a piece of chicken in my outstretched hand and sat very still. Shadow approached cautiously, his amber eyes fixed on mine. When he was close enough that I could feel his warm breath on my fingers, he gently took the meat from my hand. The touch was electric. His whiskers brushed against my palm, and I could feel the careful control he exercised to avoid hurting me with his sharp teeth. In that moment, I realized that this magnificent creature had chosen to trust me completely. The responsibility of that trust was both thrilling and terrifying. From that day forward, Shadow would take at least one piece of food directly from my hand during each visit. It became our special ritual, a moment of connection that transcended the natural barrier between human and wild animal. I began to understand why some people devoted their lives to wildlife rehabilitation. There was something magical about earning the trust of a creature that owed you nothing. December brought heavy snows and bitter cold. I worried constantly about Shadow, wondering if he was warm enough, if he was finding enough food beyond what I provided. My concern surprised me with its intensity. When had this wild bobcat become so important to my daily happiness? He continued to visit every morning, arriving like clockwork just as the sun painted the snow-covered peaks pink and gold. His winter coat was magnificent, thick and luxurious, with spots that seemed to shift and dance in the changing light. He'd grown confident enough to explore my entire yard, marking certain trees and rocks as if claiming territory. One morning, he brought me a gift. I was sitting on the porch, waiting for him to finish his breakfast, when he approached with something in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet and stepped back, watching my reaction intently. It was a perfectly preserved bird feather, iridescent blue and black, probably from a magpie. I was stunned. In all my research about bobcats, I'd never read about them bringing gifts to humans. But there was no mistaking the intentional nature of his action. He had brought this beautiful feather specifically for me. "Thank you," I whispered, picking up the feather with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful." Shadow's purr was barely audible, but I felt it more than heard it. He seemed pleased by my reaction, settling down nearby to groom himself while I admired his gift. That feather became one of my most treasured possessions, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most profound connections happen when we least expect them. From that day forward, Shadow occasionally brought me small gifts, interesting stones, unusual leaves, once even a perfectly shaped pine cone. Each offering felt like a declaration of friendship from a creature who had every reason to fear humans. January tested both of us. The temperatures dropped to dangerous lows and snow fell almost daily. I worried that Shadow might not survive such harsh conditions despite his thick winter coat. My anxiety reached new heights when he missed 3 consecutive morning visits. On the 4th day, I made a decision that would have seemed insane to me 6 months earlier. I put on my heaviest winter gear, filled a backpack with food, and set out to look for him. Following his usual path into the forest, I called his name softly, hoping he might respond. 2 hours into my search, I found him. He was sheltering in a small cave, clearly weak and struggling. When he saw me, he made that same chirping sound I'd heard on his 2nd visit, but it was fainter now, almost desperate. Without hesitation, I approached and offered him food from my hand. He ate ravenously, and I could see that he hadn't been successful hunting in the deep snow. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the vulnerability of a creature pushed to its limits by nature's harsh realities. I couldn't leave him there. Using my emergency whistle and some rope from my backpack, I created a makeshift trail marker system so I could find the cave again. Then I made multiple trips, bringing him food and even an old sleeping bag to help insulate his shelter. For a week, I made daily treks to his cave, ensuring he had enough food to survive the worst of the winter storm. When the weather finally broke, Shadow followed me home, and I realized our relationship had fundamentally changed. I wasn't just feeding a wild animal anymore. I was caring for a friend. When spring finally arrived in Montana, it brought with it a transformation I hadn't expected. Shadow's behavior began to change in subtle ways. He became more restless during his visits, often looking toward the deeper forest with what seemed like longing. I realized that mating season was approaching, and my heart sank. I'd always known this day would come. Shadow was a wild animal, and despite our bond, he belonged in the wilderness with his own kind. But the thought of losing him filled me with a grief I hadn't anticipated. Over the winter months, he'd become more than just a daily visitor. He'd become family. One morning in early April, Shadow arrived with a different energy about him. He was more alert, more focused on the forest sounds around us. As he ate, he kept pausing to listen to calls I couldn't hear. When he finished his meal, he approached me and rubbed against my leg, something he'd never done before. The gesture was clearly a goodbye. I knelt down and gently stroked his head, feeling the vibration of his purr beneath my palm. His amber eyes looked directly into mine, and I swear I saw gratitude there, along with something that looked remarkably like affection. "Go find your family," I whispered. "You deserve to be happy." He nuzzled my hand once more, then turned and walked toward the forest. At the edge of the clearing, he paused and looked back at me. Our eyes met one last time, and then he disappeared into the trees. I sat on my porch for hours afterward, crying tears I didn't fully understand. I'd done the right thing by not trying to keep him, but that didn't make letting go any easier. The weeks following Shadow's departure were some of the loneliest of my life. I still set my alarm for dawn, still prepared food and sat on the porch, hoping against hope that he might return. But the forest remained empty, and my yard felt abandoned without his presence. I tried to convince myself that this was how it should be. Shadow was living his natural life, probably finding a mate and establishing his own territory. But logic did little to ease the ache in my chest every morning when he didn't appear. My painting suffered during this time. The landscapes that had once inspired me now seemed flat and lifeless. I'd lost my muse, my daily source of wonder and connection. Friends who called noticed the change in my voice, the sadness I couldn't quite hide. "Maybe you should get a cat," my sister suggested during one of our weekly phone calls, "or a dog, something to keep you company." But I couldn't explain to her that no domestic animal could replace what I'd shared with Shadow. The magic had been in his wildness, in the fact that he'd chosen to trust me, despite every instinct telling him not to. A pet would be a pale substitute for that extraordinary bond. I began taking longer hikes, hoping to catch a glimpse of him in the forest. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the trees, a flash of spotted fur, but it was always just my imagination playing tricks on me. Shadow had moved on, and I needed to accept that. Still, every morning I sat on my porch with my coffee just in case. Hope, I discovered, is a stubborn thing. 6 weeks after Shadow's departure, I'd finally begun to accept that he wasn't coming back. I'd stopped preparing food for him, stopped scanning the tree line with desperate hope. The morning routine had become just that, routine, without the anticipation that had once made it magical. Which is why I nearly dropped my coffee cup when I saw him. It was barely dawn, the sky just beginning to lighten from black to deep purple. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. But no, there he was, sitting at the edge of my yard exactly where he used to wait for me to notice him. But something was different. He looked thinner, and there was a wariness in his posture that hadn't been there before. As I watched, he stood and began walking toward the porch, and that's when I saw what he carried in his mouth. My heart stopped. It was small and gray, moving slightly. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then Shadow reached the porch steps and gently set down his burden, and I understood. A kitten, tiny, probably only a few weeks old, with the distinctive tufted ears and spotted coat of a bobcat. Shadow's kitten. I stared in shock as the little one mewed pitifully, clearly hungry and cold. Shadow looked up at me with those familiar amber eyes, and in them I saw something I'd never expected to see, desperation. He was asking for my help. "Oh, Shadow," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What happened?" He chirped softly in response, the same sound he'd made during our first tentative interactions, but now it carried a weight of urgency, of need, that went far beyond his own survival. As I knelt down to get a closer look at the kitten, Shadow's story began to unfold in my mind. The little one was clearly malnourished and weak, its tiny body trembling with cold and hunger. Shadow himself looked exhausted, his coat dull, and his eyes shadowed with what looked remarkably like grief. I'd read enough about bobcat behavior to understand what had likely happened. Shadow had found a mate, and she'd given birth to this kitten. But something had gone wrong. Perhaps she'd been killed by a larger predator, or hit by a car, or fallen victim to any number of dangers that wild animals face daily. Shadow had been left alone to care for a baby he couldn't properly feed or protect. And he'd remembered me. In his desperation, he'd brought his most precious possession to the one human who had shown him kindness. The kitten mewed again, a sound so pitiful it broke my heart. Without hesitation, I scooped up the tiny creature, feeling its rapid heartbeat against my palm. It was so small, so fragile, that I was afraid I might hurt it just by holding it. Shadow watched my every move, his body tense with anxiety. When I stood up with his kitten in my hands, he made a low, worried sound. "It's okay," I told him softly. "I'm going to help. Both of you." I carried the kitten inside, Shadow following close behind, the first time he'd ever entered my cabin. In my kitchen, I warmed some milk and used a small syringe to feed the hungry baby. Shadow sat nearby, never taking his eyes off his offspring, occasionally making soft, encouraging sounds. As the kitten fed, I saw hope return to Shadow's eyes. He'd made the right choice in bringing his baby to me. Together, we were going to save this precious life. The next few weeks transformed my quiet cabin into something resembling a wildlife rehabilitation center. The kitten, whom I named Luna for her silvery coat, required feeding every few hours. Shadow never left her side for long, and he seemed to understand that I was now part of their family unit. It was fascinating to watch Shadow's parenting instincts in action. He would groom Luna meticulously, teach her to use the litter box I'd set up, and bring her small toys, usually sticks or leaves he found in the yard. When she slept, he curled his large body around her protectively, purring so loudly I could hear it from across the room. But perhaps most remarkably, Shadow began teaching Luna about me. He would demonstrate how to take food from my hand, how to respond to my voice, how to accept my touch. It was as if he was deliberately socializing her to trust humans, specifically me. Luna grew stronger each day. Her coat became lustrous and thick, her movements more coordinated and confident. She began to explore the cabin with typical kitten curiosity, getting into everything and providing endless entertainment. Shadow watched her antics with what I could only describe as paternal pride. I found myself falling in love with both of them all over again. Luna's playful nature brought laughter back into my home, while Shadow's continued presence filled the lonely spaces in my heart. We'd become an unlikely family, a middle-aged woman, a wild bobcat, and his orphaned daughter. But even as I reveled in our domestic happiness, I knew this arrangement couldn't last forever. Luna was growing rapidly, and her wild instincts were beginning to emerge. Soon, Shadow would need to teach her skills I couldn't provide: how to hunt, how to survive in the wilderness, how to be a true bobcat. As summer progressed, Shadow began taking Luna on short expeditions into the forest. At first, these trips lasted only an hour or two, with Shadow teaching her basic skills like stalking and pouncing. I would watch from my porch as he demonstrated hunting techniques, using leaves and small sticks as practice prey. Luna was an eager student, mimicking her father's movements with increasing accuracy. Her playful pounces gradually became more focused and purposeful. Shadow's patience with her was extraordinary. He would repeat lessons over and over until she mastered each skill. But they always returned to the cabin by evening. Luna would curl up in her favorite spot by the fireplace, while Shadow maintained his vigil nearby. It was clear that he still considered my home a safe haven, a place where his daughter could rest and recover between lessons. One evening, as I was preparing their dinner, I noticed Shadow watching me with unusual intensity. There was something different in his expression, a sadness that I recognized all too well. He was preparing to leave again, and this time he would take Luna with him. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this day would come, but I wasn't ready. Over the past months, Luna had become like a daughter to me, and Shadow like a dear friend. The thought of losing them both was almost unbearable. That night, Shadow approached me as I sat on the porch. He rubbed against my leg one more time, then looked directly into my eyes. In that gaze, I saw gratitude, affection, and goodbye. He was thanking me for saving his daughter's life, for giving them both a safe place to heal and grow. "I understand," I whispered, stroking his magnificent head. "She needs to learn to be wild. You're a good father, Shadow." The next morning arrived gray and misty, as if nature itself was mourning our impending separation. Shadow and Luna appeared at their usual time, but there was a different energy about them. Luna seemed more alert, more focused on the forest sounds around us. Shadow's posture was that of a wild animal preparing to return to his natural habitat. I fed them both one last time, savoring every moment. Luna playfully batted at my fingers as she ate, while Shadow watched with patient indulgence. When they finished, Shadow began grooming Luna thoroughly, preparing her for their journey. Then he did something that surprised me. He approached my chair and dropped something at my feet, another gift, like the feathers and stones he'd brought me during our early days together. But this was different. It was a small, smooth river rock, perfectly round and warm from being carried in his mouth. "Thank you," I said, picking up the stone and holding it close to my heart. "I'll treasure it always." Shadow called to Luna with a soft chirp, and she immediately went to his side. Together they walked toward the forest edge. But before disappearing into the trees, they both turned back to look at me one final time. Luna mewed once, a sound that seemed to say goodbye. Shadow's amber eyes met mine across the distance, and I saw in them all the love and gratitude that words could never express. Then they turned and vanished into the wilderness, leaving me alone with my memories and the precious stone that would forever remind me of our extraordinary bond. I sat on my porch for hours afterward, crying and smiling at the same time. I'd been privileged to witness something magical, the power of compassion to bridge the gap between species, the beauty of trust freely given and received, and the bittersweet joy of loving something enough to let it go. 6 months have passed since Shadow and Luna disappeared into the forest, and my life has settled into a new rhythm. I still sit on my porch every morning with my coffee, but now it's a meditation rather than a vigil. The stone Shadow gave me sits on my windowsill, catching the morning light and reminding me daily of the incredible gift I was given. My painting has returned with renewed vigor. The landscapes I create now are infused with a deeper understanding of the wild creatures that inhabit them. I've started a series called Bonds Beyond Boundaries, depicting the connections that can form between humans and wildlife when approached with respect and compassion. Sometimes, on very quiet mornings, I think I catch glimpses of movement in the distant trees, a flash of spotted fur, the glint of amber eyes watching from the shadows. I can never be certain, but I like to think Shadow and Luna still consider this place part of their territory, that they remember the human who helped them when they needed it most. Last week, I received a call from the local wildlife rehabilitation center. They'd heard about my experience with Shadow and wanted to know if I'd be interested in volunteering. It seems word had spread about the woman who'd successfully helped raise an orphaned bobcat kitten. I said yes immediately. If my experience with Shadow and Luna taught me anything, it's that sometimes the most profound purpose in life comes from the most unexpected places. I may never see my wild friends again, but I can honor their memory by helping other creatures in need. As I write this, the sun is setting over the Montana wilderness, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, Shadow is teaching Luna to hunt under the stars, and she's learning to be the magnificent wild creature she was born to be. And here in my cabin, I'm learning that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, the greatest love is knowing when to let go. The stone on my windowsill catches the last rays of sunlight, and for a moment, I swear I can hear the distant sound of a bobcat's call echoing through the forest. It might be my imagination, but it sounds like a greeting, a reminder that some bonds transcend distance and time. I smile and raise my coffee cup in a silent toast to the wilderness and all its magnificent creatures. "Thank you, Shadow," I whispered to the gathering darkness. "Thank you for choosing to trust me.